As an evolving conceptual field, my work attempts to speculate on a series of organizational processes concerned with systems, networks, and relationships between discrete objects. This process attempts to redefine the traditional concepts definitive of architectural praxis by subverting the relationships between figure and ground, object and process, invisible and visible, finite and infinite. My architecture is defined not by built structure, but by the relationships of forms within an abstract field of dynamic conditions. As a set, my projects span a great diversity of topologies and formal considerations: a STEM school, architecture building, grotto, and gallery. Rather than a stylistic constant, my practice seeks to create experiential and process constants, ensuring specificity and engagement with complex spatial conditions. Formulated as a space of propagation and effects, my architecture concerns itself not with the form of objects, but with the relationship of discrete objects with each other. I see field conditions as a bottom-up phenomenon, defined not by overarching geometric schemas, but by intricate local connections, its structure starting to dynamically capture masses in motion, democratizing the relationship between the space and the body. Within the Deviations project, discrete classrooms are dispersed within a dissolved corridor circulation field. These discrete elements are in which the episodic architecture is defined, the whole and extension of the distinct. The schema is an imperfect collection of parts. By celebrating the natural architectural mess, new forms of hierarchy are uncovered rather than imposed upon a project. Such considerations align my work most closely with postmodernism, deconstructivism, and postminimalism as theoretical frameworks. As an extension of this, I reject the desire to simplify architecture into a monumental or authoritarian unitary form. I am interested in the creation of complex space, but not necessarily complex form. Through these spatial complexities, my buildings offer a degree of polemic commentary, democratizing space as an equally experienced condition, outside of social hierarchies. I have a complicated relationship with process. While project development is often heavily defined by recipes, the outcomes are not necessarily strictly referential to their roots, instead judged based upon their intrinsic qualities. The interweaving of design intuition and process-based experimentation facilitate a paradigmatic shift away from the endemic dialectics concerned with the primitive architectural form and towards an architecture defined by systems, networks, and the relationships between objects in a theoretical field. The main adaptable part of this process is the swapping out of different field generation techniques between contextual, non-contextual, and post-contextual methods. The post-contextual methodologies presents new epistemological and repeatable methods to relinquish the architect's control of their traditional hermeneutic domain, instead expanding and evolving the field of practice. In this example, non-architectural data is applied to existing typologies to generate new educational typological solutions through the decontextualization of the existing type. Seeking to generate new architectural form and expression completely removed from the context and architectural zeitgeist. Non-contextual methods involve experimenting on forms based on both natural and found conditions. This generated a system of iterative alterations upon a base form, which provided spatially complex, if not architecturally unwieldy space. As the cliché of modernism, the contextual and sequential erosion of a generic base form is satirized and exaggerated to form the architecture hub, such that the outcomes no longer directly speak to their generators. This is done as a tongue-in-cheek criticism of the desire to form find as a basis for architectural process, as well as to create views or to simplify a project into a multi-million-dollar Instagram post. Such methodologies lean into the impurity and unpredictability inherent in field systems. As a kit of parts or dissolved architecture, the resolution of the detail comes from the curatorial authorship over the field into the generation of networks that support the programs and agencies. The hierarchy emerges from the agencies of parts rather than the connected overall. The untapped potential of field systems within the architectural realm is the extension of these methodologies across the scales of architecture, extra small through extra large. There is potential for the projects to have an agency with a wider civic condition by first framing the building as a discrete element within a series of connected networks, or the civic field. This concept saw the formation of the STEM Centre as a series of layered paths, each with their own degree of agency to the city. In addition, the architecture hub was framed as an extension of the surrounding civic context, at its park edge extending the park vertically, and at the city edge extending the street into a pedestrian laneway. Architecture is space. As a spatial condition, field techniques generate complexities and describe space without buildings, moving from individual rooms to a collective. To me, successful architecture is the collection of diverse space which enable occupant agency. While the predictable outcome is a complex horizontal plane, there is the potential for layering and systems of void to create vertical planes of complexity. The clashes and interaction between different planes and datums enable void as a social connector, but also the potential for buildings to be spatially established through their section. This vertical field creates a series of unexpected and dynamic spaces, from the enveloping of smaller spaces within the open field at Lux Viventum to the dramatic entrance walkway of the STEM Centre. These zones of uncertainty activate engagement with the building. A weakness of such polemics is the creation of a difficult-to-access, unequal architectural landscape, a contradiction that needs to be addressed further in future projects concerned with counter-hierarchy. Just as no building is an everlasting monument, treating ideas as rules leads to prescriptive and stylistic constants, which by nature embed the contemporary project within the past. My oeuvre itself captures a shifting paradigm of interest and understanding, offering not a divine singular thread, but rather an attitude to willingly contradict predecessors, each project embedded within the context of its formation. As an exemplar of my concerns, the proposal for the Arts Centre Melbourne Gallery through field-style generation and curation is framed within the context of past weaknesses, largely a lack of resolution in the final concept and a lack of interweaving with the city. By working the project down to the scale of the extra small construction details, the project bridges the gap between the theoretical and physical. In satirical contextual generation, a moire of dense existing grids on site carve the building internally and formally into two, enabling both an open space filled with discrete objects, as well as a confined sequence of space. The splitting of the building also enabled the project to address the tendencies of fields to generate static, monotonous conditions, by instead creating two separate fields, a private and a public, articulated through the threshold condition, the public spilling out into the civic realm, while the private enclosing the occupant within a fractured facade. The project also speculates over different times, romanticising the construction process as a public spectacle and contemplating upon a future extension to the gallery. This extension brings with it the inclusion of new orders into the project, preventing a monumental cementation into the collective memory, instead kept in a constant flux. As an extension of Bernard Schumy's idea of an event city, a vast sequence of differing spaces and connections continuously contextualizes the discrete room, unified in sequence and propagated spatially. Likewise, the vertical sequence of ramps create a constantly shifting perspective of the field. This forces the project to be a journey and an unfolding of an experience, loosely established but left for the user to define a path through the space. As a method, a kit of parts were created through the recontextualization of Melbourne architectural ideas into the space. For example, the variation overhangs at the Paran Hotel windows, which suggested degrees of publicness, were brought into the realm of the existing context for a new set of window conditions. This project also revealed my inner attitude towards making architecture, a belief that it is temporal but not akin to demolition. This is evident in the material concerns of the project, uncapped concrete left to slowly age, porous to allow evidence of past occupation. As an expansion of this research, my current work frames the theoretical understanding of the field to include more clearly the decay of the civic threshold as a postmodernism. The disparity in the scalar fields currently existing in the work is let further crumble, the large field the result of the extra small distribution. Operating at the scale of an entire suburb and framing the built fabric as a discrete object unlocks their potential as placemaking elements within the wider city field. This doesn't have the intention of creating monuments for photos, but rather to create social condensers, or a stage set enabled by wider community engagement through episodic urbanism. In this way, the architecture proposes frameworks for future growth of the urban and spatial conditions. In specifying the project into its Brunswick context by referencing the Padua Theatre, specific references to collective memory and critical regionalism enhance the field from a generic superficial into a Melbourne context of pluralism and dialogues and shifting buildings into cities of hope. Rather than a constant regeneration, the architect is framed as the custodian of well-worn ideas. The work suggests a series of potential future explorations into further methodologies of field generation, better curatorial methods, a translation of a material condition, as well as experimentation between tight and loose spaces within a small-scale interior. Iconoclastically restructuring the figure of the architect, my practice disassociates from traditional architectural praxis, establishing a foothold in other disciplines to generate new perceptions of architectural space. This ensures the architect's continued relevance as a designer of the built environment by tapping into and generating nodes as a part of a wider network. the building subsidiary to its context. Thank you.